This is Dominic Ventresco, and I will be presenting information regarding the current and future status of inclusion and co-teaching today. This information is provided for assignment number 2 for EDSP 423 of the University of Idaho. Within this presentation, I will be featuring information conducted from the interviews of Brenda Harden and Martha Zerger. Mrs. Harden is a 6th grade general education teacher at McGee Elementary of Lewiston School District, and Martha Zerger is a third grade general education teacher at McDonald Elementary of Moscow School District. Let's get started, shall we? We're going to start with the current status of inclusion and co-teaching. In this section, we will discuss what the research says about the current status, where and how this method is most effective, and how legislation has greatly impacted the concept of inclusion and co-teaching. So what does the research say about the current status? Since its creation in 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act contains a least restrictive environment provision. This provision states that students who have disabilities are to be educated with children who are non-disabled with the use of appropriate supplementary aids and services. Current trends in public education are leading to a greater inclusion for students with disabilities. According to Vance Austin's survey in 2001, a large majority of general education and special education co-teachers stated that they worked well and benefited from teaching each other, from teaching together, as well as found it as a great opportunity to ask for each other's feedback. Both groups of teachers stated that the co-teaching experience was worthwhile and contributed to the improvement of their teaching. A majority of the co-teachers believed that the co-teaching contributed positively to the academic and social development of all their students. In terms of inclusion, there have been an increase in one-on-one paraprofessionals as more students with greater disability-related supports are needed in the general education classroom. Under IDEA, paraprofessionals are allowed to assist the provision of special education if properly trained, as well as be supervised by a quality professional. Where and how does co-teaching work best? Co-teaching is the vehicle in which the demands of the new legislation can be met. An increased emphasis in educating students in the least restrictive environment is one of these demands. The goal for an inclusive school is to have most, if not all, instruction for all students to be in the general education setting. Students are better served in settings that are like those of their non-disabled peers. If several students with learning disabilities are in a similar need, it is best to place these students in the same co-teaching location. Co-teaching works best when there are 2 certified educators for one single group of students in one single location for a specific set of content. The professionals share the instructional responsibility as well as have mutual ownership and joint accountability. How has legislation impacted the philosophy of inclusion and co-teaching? IDEA and No Child Left Behind have had a large impact on co-teaching. It has increased the level of requirement to teach all students in the least restrictive environments. For this demand to be met, students must be provided with services and supports in the general education classroom. Both No Child Left Behind and IDEA of 2004 challenged school personnel to provide evidence-based interventions to their students who display inadequate performance. These legislative pressures have challenged educators to find efficient yet effective ways to provide high-quality instruction for the students with disabilities. This leads to the idea of co-teaching. This is the expectation that the general and special education teachers work collaboratively in the general education setting with those students who have disabilities or are at the risk of academic difficulty. Now let's move on to how inclusion and co-teaching works in Idaho or in a local district. We will be reviewing what the Idaho Manual states about co-teaching, what some activities may look like that promote co-teaching, best practices and approaches of co-teaching, and we will then look into some personal experiences of the co-teaching process. What does the Idaho Manual say about co-teaching? The Idaho State Special Education Manual refers to IDEA of 2004 and states that all students with disabilities must be educated with age-appropriate peers with or without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. According to Brenda Harden, the Lewiston School District follows the Idaho State Special Education Manual as well as the new Special Education Teacher Training Manual specific to their district. This manual outlines a checklist at which the teachers of the district can follow to make the co-teaching process more effective. It also provides suggestions of different methods of preparation and instruction that could be beneficial for the co-teaching pair. What kind of activities are promoting inclusion? Activities that Mrs. Harden has experienced that promote inclusion and the use of co-teaching include staff meetings, collaboration meetings, and general planning time. She states that some of the most beneficial times are at IEP meetings and parent-teacher conferences. She also stated that time is allotted in the school day at which she and the special education teacher are able to get together and go over lesson plans and make any adjustments needed for the students with disabilities. Mrs. Zerker has experienced activities as well during the process of inclusion of some of her students. She has had students that have required instructional assistance from agencies outside of the school. Her and those instructors often met throughout the week to check the status of how well the student was doing with the specialized curriculum that was designed for that student. Based on those meetings, both the instructor and Mrs. Zerker made accommodations for that student that were necessary in order for that student to be successful. Now let's go over some of the best practices and approaches to co-teaching. The text brings about multiple approaches to co-teaching in the classroom. The first one is one teaching, one observing. During this approach, one professional teaches while the other observes. The first professional has the main responsibility for designing and delivering specific instruction to the whole group. The second professional systematically collects data related to a single student or group of students for their behaviors. Next, we have station teaching. This approach actively involves both the professionals and instruction. The students move from station to station based on a predetermined schedule, and each professional gives a specific set of instructions. Parallel teaching is an approach at which lowers the student-to-teacher ratio. Both teachers coordinate themselves to where all the students are gaining the same instructions, but each teacher teaches half the class. This approach is most beneficial for drill and practice activities, test reviews, and topics that require high student discussion. Now we have alternative teaching. This approach has both teachers instructing, but one teacher takes a small group of students and gives instruction on a topic that is different from the rest of the class. Team teaching is an approach where both teachers are responsible for the lesson. They share instruction time with the students as a whole group. And finally, we have one teaching, one assisting. This is an approach that requires the least amount of collaborative planning. This approach denies the active teaching role of a professional and could possibly harm the co-teaching relationship and credibility of the observing professional. Now let's see what some experiences with co-teaching and inclusion have to offer. Brenda Harden claimed that some of her best experiences came from working with instructional assistants that work closely with a special educator. Her and the assistants have worked well together and have developed a deep knowledge of the curriculum, and this allows them to make adjustments that will allow differentiation to occur. She also feels that having the ability to have another adult in the room is very beneficial because then she is able to have additional help with students who are in need of assistance, as well as have help with progress monitoring of other students. Martha Zerker stated her experiences more with the concept of inclusion. She definitely feels keeping the students with disabilities in the general ed setting is very important. She has experienced students who are kept in the same environment as their peers gain even larger improvements than they could have elsewhere. For example, she claimed that one of her students has improved tremendously in their speech development by having that interaction with their peers every day in the general ed setting. Finally, we're going to review what is in the future for inclusion and co-teaching. Here we will discuss things that can be done at the national, state, and local levels to improve the usage of co-teaching and inclusion. So what needs to be done nationally? Well, I feel that we have done all that we can do. By having the least restrictive environment provision in IDEA, Public Law 94-142, and the requirements from the Idaho State Special Education Manual, the push for inclusive education and students with disabilities being in the same environment as their age-appropriate peers has been noticed. School districts statewide are attempting to make adjustments to make sure that these provisions are being met. If there had to be something done at the national level, then I feel that the government must mandate the full inclusion statement of the least restrictive environment provision in IDEA of 2004. That can be one way to force upon educators of the nation that inclusion and co-teaching is the method of instruction worth considering. What can be done by the State Department of Education? I feel that the state board could do various things to spread the idea of inclusion and provide both professionals and the public with opportunities to learn about the concept. Providing conferences, webinars, or even technological presentations that can be accessed from the state board website will be beneficial. Professionals then can access and gain more knowledge and resources about the idea of inclusion and co-teaching. Gian Greco suggests alternative solutions to increasing the use of inclusion and co-teaching in schools that can be done at the school and district level. One method is coming to an agreement on a shared definition of what inclusion is. This definition must be able to be known among all educators as well as parents in the district. It also must fall in line with the least restrictive environment provision of IDEA. Another method is to create a set of guiding principles that can help clarify educational supports. This can benefit the use of inclusion and co-teaching because this will allow teams to look into supports that are already available in the classroom rather than automatically looking for supports outside the classroom. From a personal reflection, I feel the idea of inclusion and co-teaching is very good and can benefit students tremendously. I am all for keeping students who have disabilities with their peers because the social aspect of education is just as important as the academics. More times than not, I feel students will utilize the social skills they have developed in school more than the actual academic knowledge they gain. My only concern with this idea comes in the hands of the special education teacher. There must be a handful of special education teachers in one building in order for this style of teaching to work. If a special educator has a large caseload, it will be nearly impossible for them to be able to give inclusive supports to their students simultaneously. If a special educator had a caseload that is smaller and more manageable, then it would be more possible to transition between classrooms and provide the supports they need for those students in their caseloads. I wish to learn more about the process and read more about teachers' experiences with this style of teaching. From what I have read, the basic idea behind the principle is fantastic and can be very prosperous, but the execution could be tricky. I would love to see more studies be conducted on this issue and see what parameters can be set to make this style of teaching as successful as it can be. In the future, I feel I will be a big advocate of inclusive supports for my students. Not only will it keep my students with their peers and have them develop those collaboration skills, but it will also keep me credible in terms of this content knowledge of the general ed curriculum. I feel by having a firm grasp of the general ed curriculum, making those differentiated adjustments for my students will come that much easier and smoother with a general ed teacher. When the execution of the differentiation is smooth, that is when the student with the disability will be more successful. And here is a list of the sources I cited for this information. I want to thank you for taking the time to review the information I provided for you about the current and future status of inclusion and co-teaching. I hope to see you next time.